Well, hello. What's going on? It's me again, Tim Warner. And here I want to talk about a three-legged stool. Think of a stool with three legs, doesn't matter what it's composed of. And now think about the stability of that stool if you remove one or even two of the legs. The stool becomes functionally worthless, doesn't it? This is why I like to use the three-legged stool as a metaphor for my certification study model. Now, there's nothing particularly groundbreaking about this model. It consists of three interdependent pillars, and I always discuss this and share this with my students when I'm teaching IT certification courses, because I think this guidance applies regardless of whether you're pursuing a vendor-specific or vendor-neutral information security, or information technology, rather, certification exam. It could be an InfoSec exam as far as that goes. The first of these three pillars or legs is conceptual understanding, shortened as theory. And the own vendor, if it's a vendor cert, then the vendor's own documentation is your first stop. In the Microsoft world, this is pretty easy. Learn.microsoft.com, and you're done. Different technology vendors put different levels of emphasis on their documentation. Microsoft, I think, stands out pretty well. Mixed results on other vendors. It just really depends. I've mentioned that another of my operating philosophies is that print books are a poor choice for most IT subjects, whereas online documentation can be updated same day. Second pillar of my model is hands-on experience. This would be practice. A common prejudgment against IT certifications is the paper tiger syndrome. I don't want to work with somebody who's been hired because they've got a bunch of certs. The question is, do they know how to do the work? And that's what I always come back to as a teacher. Passing certifications may help you fulfill initial screening requirements for a position. Basically a human resources checkbox. You may also need certifications because the business, say, is a vendor partner and they have to have X number of certified individuals in their staff. But ultimately, at the end of the day, to use that cliche, you either know how to do the work or you don't. And certainly I've known plenty of people in industry who can do the work, actually complete the tasks, but then when I press them for their understanding of why they're doing what they're doing, they come back with humana, humana, humana. It's basically how I've always done it. That's not sufficient. I strongly recommend you build those muscles equally so that you can explain what you're doing with crystal clarity. You know the theory behind the practice, and you also know how to do the theory. So it's really an interdependent back and forth. The third and final leg of the stool in my IT certification study model is practice exam drilling. Now here I am not, please mark my words on this, I'm not referring to the illegally obtained brain dumps, which are stolen live exam items that are published online, most often now for a fee. People steal the exam content and they want to make a buck. I trust that you wouldn't seek out this materials anyway, but I mention it because there are some online training vendors like Udemy, not to call out Udemy, but frankly, they deserve it, who have such poor vetting. It's pretty regular occurrence where brain dumps will show up on their site. So what this is a hazard to you to make sure that before you invest in a practice exam, do due diligence to make sure that it is in fact a legitimate practice exam and not a stolen brain dump, because if the certification vendor learns that you've prepared using a brain dump, they will decertify you. And if you were, for instance, permanently decertified from Microsoft certifications, that immediately hobbles your entire career trajectory, because that means you'll no longer be eligible for positions that require certification, or at least Microsoft certification. You see what I mean? So how do these three pillars hang together? I sometimes use London's Tower Bridge as another metaphorical illustration of this model, where the conceptual understanding and the hands-on drilling form the pillars or posts of the bridge, and the certification practice exams form the bridge between theory and practice. And I think that's a pretty apt illustration because it's really a question of interdependence among all three of those. For an example, I've known plenty of people over the years who went into their certification exam with plenty of conceptual understanding, but not enough hands-on or practice exam drilling. They didn't pass. I've also known people with lots of industry experience who knew the theory behind their skill set, but because they weren't prepared for a computer-based format, they felt blindsided and didn't pass. So investing in a quality practice exam gives you or helps you to develop the muscle memory of taking a computer-based test, being able to get into the zone, think about those questions, choose the correct answer choices. And also the practice exams help you evaluate and calibrate your readiness, both for hands-on practice as well as conceptual. Now, I don't know of any practice exams at this point that include hands-on components. However, there are interactive item types that largely simulate hands-on. For example, there's an interactive item type used on a lot of IT cert exams called build, list, and reorder, where you're given a task to do where you choose X number of tasks from a large list. That's phase one, the build. And then you reorder them. You have to put those steps in the correct logical order. So this is a verification that you've done that work. So if it's a stepwise procedure, you understand those steps. Another technique is an interactive item type called active screen, in which you might see a code extract that has drop-down list boxes interspersed within the code. And your successfully answering that question involves your opening each drop-down control and then selecting the appropriate code fragment. So you're demonstrating to the certification vendor that you can read the code, you can interpret it, and even make corrections where necessary. Some vendors actually have live lab environments within the exams themselves. Again, to use Microsoft, because that's my main area of specialty, many of their exams have a hands-on component, particularly for the Microsoft Azure cloud exams, where directly in your exam session, you sign in via remote desktop protocol. You sign into the Azure portal using credentials that the exam engine provides, and you need to complete a series of tasks. Those tasks normally have no interdependency. They're freestanding. And you can complete them using code or the graphical user interface. It doesn't matter. The exam engine will capture your work under the hood. You might know that all your work in Azure is represented as JavaScript object notation or JSON. So the exam engine takes that JSON, runs it through a validation process to give you your score. So to sum up, I would advise you to not neglect any of those three pillars. You want to understand the theory, so you understand A, what the capabilities of your domain are, and B, how they work. Number two, you want to make sure you can actually do the work and not just talk about it and understand it from a cognitive perspective. And even more to that point, once you have the theory and practice bound together, that's going to make you much more valuable to your colleagues, your customers, to everybody, because you'll be able to explain what you're doing, hopefully, to quote one of my idols, Richard Feynman, you can explain it to a 5-year-old, and they would understand just as much as a full-time programmer would understand. That's the goal, anyway. And then lastly, the practice exam drilling will do nothing but give you confidence in terms of when you see the live exam, you will already have developed that cognitive muscle memory. and you're already aware of how the vendor is going to evaluate your knowledge in a computer-based testing context. And to use the old cliche of learning to ride a bike, it's a similar process. The more of these exams you take, the more experience you build, you attain your learning curve, and it becomes almost second nature to you. This is a good thing because, as I keep mentioning over and over and over again, as an IT professional, you by definition are an eternal student. So you need to get accustomed to not only taking certification exams, but renewing those certifications on a regular basis, normally a yearly cadence. All right. Now, I don't know if there's going to be any video glitches that show up in the final product. If there are, let me give you my apologies in advance. I'm seeing some artifacts happen on my display as I'm recording this, so it'll be interesting to see. I hope they don't show up in the final product. At any rate, thank you as always. I appreciate you. Leave comments if you want. I'm happy to read and respond, and I'll see you next time. Bye.